Oklahoma City with the governor.
Call the meeting to order. We are all present this evening. At the Commissioner's request, discuss any item of concern on the regular session agenda of January 3, 2019. Anybody? Item 3, discuss the 2017-2018 fiscal year audit for the city and related authorities.
Well, great. Mayor, pleased to have the auditor, Mike Gibson, here. And first, we're going to start out with a little overview that Jennifer's going to give. And
Made a mistake.
yes, okay.
Colonel Simmons.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm back on. Most folks at the table and some of the folks on the side, State of the Base brief is next Friday. Some of you had an opportunity of RSVP. If you can't come, I get it. But I want to make sure everybody knows about it. And then just give you some expectation management. So 9:30 at Autry Tech is when coffee starts, basically. Like to have everybody show up by 10. I'll meander everybody into the room to be able to start the brief by 10:15 and have you out of there by 11:30. If the wiggle room, my brief is 35 minutes. The wiggle room is how long is Senator Inhofe going to talk?
That'll be a while.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
It's never been brief.
Yeah, it's never been brief. So Senator Inhofe has confirmed he's going to come. Haven't heard from Senator Representative Lucas. Have heard from Langford. He's not coming. Ask the mayor to speak. I'll give my brief, and then it'll end with Major General Daugherty, my boss from Randolph, is going to come up and kind of end it. So the goal is to get everybody out by 11:30. It will be, in theory, a feel-good brief. You'll get to meet. I'm going to do 5 spotlight. So on 5 of my airmen, to include, we have a former nun who's going through pilot training. So you can kind of special interest, that kind of feel. I'll talk about stuff we need, stuff we pulled off during the year, and just literally like a State of the Union. And everybody should leave that room feeling, I hope, decent about what's going on in Vance. So the intent is that once a year, we owe you, Enid, and the folks that do it, this is what's going on at your base. So we've never done it before. So I'm sure we'll have some growing pains, but I think that you'll enjoy your time and I won't waste it. So if you can come, great. If you have an RSVP and you are coming, love to know, because there's only 125 seats. I invited 142 people, just saying. But we had about 95 RSVPs as of this morning. So hopefully I have you guys there. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Is it in the lectorium?
It is in the electorate. That's correct.
I will be the most brief.
And if anybody's worried about the J-Luce thing, they did reschedule that to the day before so that it wouldn't conflict.
Correct.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah, I do too.
Sorry that wasn't on the agenda, but we worked it in.
Yeah.
Well, it's,
Close enough.
yeah.
You're the mayor, so.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Gerald, you're up. Sorry, I had to do that.
Yes, very pleased. Jennifer's going to come on up to the mic, but we do have the audit. You've had a chance to look at it electronically. The hard copy just got passed out that Mike brought up with him from Oklahoma City. He can talk about his opinion and about what he thinks, and Jennifer's going to talk about some of the highlights out of the audit. And then I know you will have questions. We'll want to answer those. The intent is to try and answer what we can tonight, hear directly from the auditor, and then come back in 2 weeks and ask you to accept it. So if you have any questions tonight or it comes up in between, let us know. And you've got the auditor's information to be able to speak to him directly if you'd like. So anyway, Jennifer, why don't you tell us about, first of all, very timely. We certainly met our requirement there. And we've actually, in my opinion, improved some of our financial statistics, which will help us with our financing project going forward. So why don't you tell us all the good news, Jennifer?
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. We will be going over the 6/30/18 financial statement overview and audit report this evening. We'll take a look at probably just the first 12 pages or so, including the management discussion and analysis section, along with a few financial highlights. And then I'll turn it over to Mr. Gibson from RSM.
And just so everybody knows, that starts on about page 3. The opinions on 1 and 2, but Mike will talk about the opinion in a minute.
So first off, the Finance Division sent out the request for audit firm proposals, and the City Council approved the selection of RSM in April 2018. And that's his information, which is at the beginning and the end of the presentation. So our opinion is the best assurance any auditor can give. Pages 1 to 2 are the auditor's opinion. And it is on the financial statements of the city and the related authorities. Page 2, the audit was issued on time, which was December 26, 2018. And they issued an opinion on the government-wide statements units, both governmental type and business type, on each major fund of the city and the aggregated remaining funds. The major funds on the governmental are general fund, police, fire, capital improvement, water capital improvement, and then the major funds for business type, EMA, event center, and airport. The non-major funds aggregated for governmental, special projects, 911, water assessment, street and alley, CDBG, paving assessment, EEDA, street improvement fund, sanitary sewer, stormwater, capital projects, escrow, sinking fund. Then the non-major funds aggregated for business type is golf and transit. So on each of the opinion units, the auditors determined that the financial statements present fairly in all the material reports.
He'll explain what all that means here in a minute.
Right. So on the government-wide state of activities, our revenues increased by 15.56 million and expenses decreased by about 651,000. And the next slide will break down those numbers a little more. So the total revenue increased by 15.56, and that includes charges for service, grants, contributions, general revenues. The charges for service was a pretty big increase for that category, and that was mainly from utility revenues increasing. And then we have a grants and contributions section, and most of that was due to the ODOT 66th Street grant that we received. We also received from FEMA some reimbursement from the 2015 ice storm. And general revenues increased the largest, and that was due to the increase in the costs, Lake sales tax, and then the other sales taxes also increased a little bit more than what we budgeted. We also had our first TIF come in for EEDA, which was the TP&L. That was the first year for that. So then our total expenses decreased by 651,000, and all those categories in both of the increases and decreases are listed. Some of those things for public safety on the increases were personnel. They added some gear, some workers' comp went up just a little bit, the pension, and then we had an additional grant for library. So that was an increase in the culture section. Utilities increase for expense was for water rights and then some call late payments. Airport had small increases. EEDA, of course, was the TP&L for the first year. And we had a very small increase on expense for golf, which had to do with taking over the snack bar. We have inventory and equipment, cost of goods sold, things that we only had 6 months in FY17, so those were the increase in 18. So we had some decreases also on the expense side. General government, small area and professional services. We had some increase or decreases in the public works area, which is our capital improvement program funds, and a small decrease for transit, and decrease for the event center operating expenses. Actually about 864,000 less than what we promoted, self-promoted, co-promoted shows. Then we have government-wide statement of net position. This is just a graphical representation. The increases were in assets, deferred inflows, and net position. And then we had decreases in deferred outflows and liabilities. The next slide will go into those exact numbers. So this is comparison from FY 17 to FY 18. Our current assets increased 17 million. Capital assets increased 5.2 million. Deferred outflows decreased 930,000. Current liabilities decreased 332,000. Long-term liabilities decreased 7.1 million. Deferred inflows increased 2.5 million. Net investment in assets increased 4.1 million. Restricted increased 11.2 million and unrestricted increased 11 million. Any questions on that page?
Out of curiosity, what's meant by the term deferred outflows and deferred inflows?
I have an answer, but
Mike can
Mike.
probably answer that best. It's a new element in the accounting equation that was discovered 2 or 3 years, or maybe 4 or 5 years
It's been
ago.
for a few years ago. Yeah, it's been, I think, since about 4 or 5 years ago. Deferred outflows and deferred inflows are items that the Governmental Accounting Standards Board has determined. Deferred outflow is a consumption of an economic resource, okay, that will provide a future benefit to the city, okay, but it doesn't recognize, it's not a current expense. So it's something it's not an asset, it's not something that you own, but it's also something that is, you don't recognize in the current period. And that's the best way I can say it. And the deferred inflows is just just the reverse. It's something that you will receive, that you've received now, but you actually don't get the benefit of actually using it. It's kind of like a liability, but it's really not. You'll just, you'll recognize it over the, can I just tell you honestly, the biggest portion of that relates to the pension plans, the police and fire pension liabilities, also your own pension plan. But the biggest portion of that relates to the police and fire pension liabilities that you had to put on several years ago, and a lot of the assumptions that go in, those things can swing one way or another significantly. The biggest, let's say, is the investment return. The actuary makes an assumption on what the investment return is going to be. The investment return is actually something else, and some years it's a positive, and some years it's a negative. And if the GASB decided that if organizations were going to have to run that through their current year income statement every year, your net income every year would go up and down, up and down. So basically, they decided to make you put it on your balance sheet and then write it off over a period of time. That's the most practical explanation of what those are for. It's more of a smoothing. It's more of a smoothing impact, and in some respects that makes sense because a pension is a long-term view, and so you don't want to run everything that happens with regards to a pension plan all in one year, because the idea of the pension plan is that it's a long-term, it's a long-term investment or a long-term retirement strategy or something like that. So I probably didn't explain that well enough.
I'm just a big fan of auditing terminology.
Okay.
I wonder sometimes why they even hand this book out to us.
Yeah.
But anyway, I know we're supposed to look at it.
If you want to study it some more tonight, Ron, on page 30,
That's all right, Gerald.
the definition of all that.
I'll take your word.
They're all defined in there for sure. So.
Does that work like an accrual?
It's similar to an accrual, yes, sir. Okay.
Aaron did mention that was the pension and OPEB also.
Yes.
And the TIF funds, that would also be
Yes.
like that.
Yes.
So we're just gonna look at a piece of this on the next slide, the current assets. So we have the unrestricted cash and investments increased by 17.1 million. So we had an increase of cash of 1.4 million, increase in investment account of 11.3 million, which that was just surpluses that we were able to be invested throughout the year, due to coming in under budget in certain areas, and then of course, use of the Call Lake restricted funds. So then we also had restricted cash and investments increased 2.4 million. That did some ups and downs. The Call Lake sales tax increased 6 million, but then the loan funds that we also had went down 8 million because we had already drawn from those. And then we had an increase in the 1% sales tax, and then of course the TIF funds were an increase of 2 million. There is a timing on the TIF receipts and the debt payments because they cross fiscal years. So that's another reason that they're up and down. So another section of that prior slide is the net capital assets. So overall, we had an increase of 5.2, and each section had increases and decreases. Land was not very much. The construction in progress has to do with the projects that are still ongoing. When we move that off, any completed project, we move off of construction in progress, and there was $5 million of that. And then there was also an increase of 17.4, so they netted out to 12. A few projects that were added was a large portion of Cleveland and Chestnut, 66th Street, and we had Call Lake design work that was 9.4 million. So then our buildings, not much change. We purchased Woodlands, and we also had some prior year capitalized interest for water towers and the wastewater treatment plant that we had to add on. The infrastructure was more Cleveland and Chestnut, and these were completed projects. So when they moved from construction in progress, they either moved to buildings infrastructure or things like that. And we had Rolling Oaks detention that was almost $2 million. We had ADA sidewalks, and then we had a stormwater improvement at Johnson and Grain over $300,000. We increased our equipment with a scraper of over $800,000. We had a backhoe and a street sweeper of almost $300,000, and we had a section of traffic signal upgrades for a little over $200,000. We increased vehicles, 7 vehicles police, and we have some work trucks for public utilities and public works. And we had a VACCON truck for over $350 million and a dump truck for over $170,000, sorry. Depreciation level is approximately the same as it was last year, and that just results in a net change of capital assets of 5.2. Another section, we have long-term debt. We have increases, but overall there was a decrease of almost 6.6 million in the long-term debt outstanding. The decreases were due to regular payments on revenue notes, TIF notes, notes payable, and capital leases. There were also decreases to the city of Enid and police pension, net pension liabilities. We also incurred some changes that increased the long-term debt category the past fiscal year as well. GASB 75 was implemented during the FY18 year, which resulted in a 2.16 million liability related to our health plan. And Mr. Gibson will probably talk about that more when he comes up. So our new scraper lease was over $780,000. And changes in some workers' comp, actuary report, compensated absences estimate, and landfill closure. There was also an increase in the fire pension plan liability of over $100,000. Further details on all of this can be found on page 43 to 49. And she did want to note that FY18 will be the last year for a while that we'll see an overall decrease, since we have already closed the 2 new loans for $65 million, and they're looking.
Just out of curiosity, where is this scraper located?
The landfill.
The landfill. Yes.
Right there. But do we only have one?
I think we have 2, don't we, Lou?
We have 2. Okay.
One of them's an older one.
It's paid for. Yes, sir.
So we're talking about net pension liability now. The overall net pension liability for the city is 27 million. This is a decrease of 2.45 million from FY17. So the employee retirement system is a single employer defined benefit plan, and it's 86.98% funded. which is increase of 1.49%. The city's pension plan liabilities recognized as of 6/30/18. And in FY17, we saw a big increase due to investment returns that were better than projected. We also saw a decrease of another $250,000 this year. Both the Oklahoma Police and Firefighters Pension and Retirement System plans are cost-sharing multiple employer plans. They are defined benefit plans that are funded by contributions from participants, employers, insurance premium taxes, and state appropriations. So the City of Enid participants, along with the police and fire departments, have fully funded their contributions in conjunction with Title 11 of the state statutes. Both police and fire's pension are recorded 1 year in arrears. So the FY18 financial statement represented their activity for the FY17 year. Police overall.
What's the difference between the firefighter pension and the police pension?
Yeah. Why is the liability so much higher for firefighters?
The firefighter and the police plans are state plans that we contribute to, to various percentages, and they contribute. And though they come up, they do an annual audit and actuarial report and tell us what our share of the liability is, and then we record it. And then, of course, our plan is for non-uniformed employees is we do our own report on. But Mike, did you want to follow up on that?
Oh, no, I was just standing ready in case you wanted me to.
I mean, but the
Yeah,
difference.
they'd probably rather hear from you than me.
But the difference is just that one is much less well-funded over time.
The
isn't it?
firefighter plan is
Yeah.
about 68% funded, I think it shows in here on one of these
Yeah.
pages.
The police plan is historically very well funded. The
Yeah.
firefighter plan is historically not, so.
Police is almost 100%,
Yeah.
fire is 66.6% funded.
Not our fault.
That's true.
Correct.
This one's not on us.
We can do,
Yeah.
I said the only change I think they made a couple of years ago was they increased employer and employee contributions by 1%.
Was it the one of the standards that changed? Is it this year? Changed how we have to report it for not the police and the fire, but the city of Enid? Is that right? Do we have a
For your
change in?
self-insurance plan, your health
The
insurance.
health,
Okay, that's the health
health
insurance.
is the only
Yeah,
thing
never
that
mind.
was added this year.
Gotcha.
So now we'll look at the historical net position. The next few slides cover net position, and here we have a historical view of the City of Enid and related authorities' overall net position. So the FY18 year, the overall increase that resulted from all the previous slides we have covered is $26.4 million increase in net position. The dip in FY14-15 is due to the implementation of GASB Statements 67 and 68, which was to recognize the net pension liability for Enid pension plan and the city's share of the state police and fire.
Generally, that upward trend is a positive thing. It shows the city.
Although over the next few years, it's going to be because we borrow a giant, obscene amount of money.
Yes, but we will over time replace that with an asset worth a giant amount of money as well. But yes.
Kind of.
Ready? So as we look at net position, the overall increase of $26.4 million was largely due to EMA, but the overall aggregate of the other funds also saw an increase. So EMA increased $14.6 million from $103.8 million to $118.4 million, and then all the other funds combined increased as well by a total of $11.8 million. Another important measure to consider is the composition of the net position balances. So there's three components: investment in net capital assets, restricted net position, and unrestricted net position. The investment in assets increased $4.1 million. The restricted net position increased $11.2 million. The unrestricted net position increased $11.1 million. So the investment in assets for FY17 made up of 89% of the balance, and FY18 made up of 81%. The restricted net position for FY17 made up for 7% of the balance, and in FY18 made up 11%. The unrestricted net position for FY17 made up 4% of the balance, and FY18 now makes up 8%. So outside of EMA, we'll look at 3 other major operational funds: general fund, police, and fire fund. The fund balance for both general fund and fire fund increased during the year, and police finished with only a decrease of $530,000 to their fund balance, which was an improvement compared to they expected to budget. Well, in their budget, they expected to have a deficit of $1.1 million. So the restricted fund balance amounts are prepaid expenses and inventories held, with the remaining fund balance unassigned.
Are those funds all pledged?
The restricted part is committed for restricted items, Mayor. The unassigned fund balance is really what's available as a way of putting it, I think.
Is that
Is
cash?
that right, Mike?
Is that cash?
No, it's not necessarily equates to cash.
But it equates to things that are relatively convertible to cash. You know, it's cash plus current fund accounts receivable that you're gonna collect minus current accounts payable that you have to pay. And then what you have left is not committed it's not restricted or committed for a specific purpose. It's available to pay bills. I actually have a little comment I was gonna make about that. If you want me to, I can do it now since you're talking about it.
I think Jennifer, probably now's a good time. Jennifer, you were about done, weren't you?
Yeah, I'm almost done.
Okay, go ahead
Do you
then.
want-
Go ahead and finish and then
Okay.
I'll come back up.
The next slide's cash and investments for EMA. When we started 3 years ago, we had a significant progress that needed to be made on the cash position for EMA. And over the past 2 years, we have went from no unrestricted cash on hand to 4.4 million as of 6/30/17 and 7.9 million as of 6/30/18. So over the past 2 years, we've also increased restricted investments from 20 million to 35.5 million. This is very important that EMA maintain this level of cash and cash equivalents. But of course, it would be ideal for EMA to grow cash balance. And she has a statement, a quote from John Wolfe. The overall audit looks very good and the EMA is in good position going forward. The next one she's talking about, the 2 GASB statements that are the new government accounting standards board statements that affected this year's financial statements. And there's many, many pages in the audit about those.
Favorite part.
So I think I will turn it over to Mr. Gibson, unless you have any more questions of me that I could write down for someone else to answer. That is it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's glad to be here. So, I guess I will talk a little bit about, just highlight on our opinion on the financial statements. As Jennifer mentioned, it was an unmodified opinion, which means we believe the financial statements are free from material misstatement and presented in accordance with GAAP. Now, our audit procedures, 2 things. One, we design our audit procedures so that we provide reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. But that's a high level of assurance. And when I say material misstatement, that's due to error or fraud. So we design our audit procedures to determine that there are no material misstatements due to either one of those things. We do not design our audit procedures to detect immaterial errors or an immaterial fraud that might occur. If such, during the course of performing our audit procedures, if we find those things, we bring them to the attention of management. You know, usually it's errors. If it's something not an error, if it's an intentional misstatement, a fraud, we would bring it to your attention. So anyway, police say that we actually did not find, other than what we call trivial items or inconsequential items. Okay, we didn't have anything of a fraud nature that we found, but even some errors that we found, you know, as we were just going through the audit process, seeing little minor things here or there, We didn't find anything other than what we considered to be inconsequential. So we thought that the team, the management team, the finance team did a really good job of getting prepared. And the couple of things we did find kind of related to the pension and the new accounting standard, the other post-employment benefits, and the team booked those entries, and so they didn't carry forward as a uncorrected entry. So anyway, it was good.
You document those in the letter to the governing body?
Yes, and do they have that letter? Because I was
Yes,
going to
they
refer to
have
that
the
in a
hard
minute.
copy and they have the electronic copy.
Yeah, okay, yeah, some of the adjustments we did find are documented in the letter that we sent to you, or that is addressed to you. One other thing about our opinion, Jennifer did describe all of the various major funds and the government-wide, and like the general fund is a major fund, the police fund, the fire fund. Well, our audit procedures, we're expressing opinions on each of the major funds. So we design our audit procedures. So, if you look at your balance sheet on page 12, I believe it is, the government-wide balance sheet, and you'll see, I'm sorry, it's page 13. $347 million in total assets, $232 million for the business type activities, $115 million for the governmental activities. But then if you flip over to page 15 and you look at the general fund, $17 million in total assets, $3 million for the police fund. So if we were only auditing at the page 13 level, that would mean that a lot of the transactions that occur at the page 15 level, we might not hit those because we are auditing at our what we would consider to be a material misstatement is different on something on page 13 versus what we consider on page 15. So we express opinions down to that level, so that increases the audit coverage significantly. Two things I did want to point out as financial highlights, although Jennifer did hit on one of them. Actually, she kind of hit on both of them, but if you look on page 17 of the audit, which is the governmental funds financial statements, what we do just to kind of gauge your financial health is say look at your general fund, police fund, and fire fund, your ending fund balances, for those three funds added up to just under $15 million. And then if we look at the expenditures of those three funds plus the required transfers, the net transfers, that was about $54 million, just a shade under $54 million. Well, that's about a 28% fund balance to expenditures and required transfers ratio. I mean, that's 3 months. That's over 3 months of reserve, if you will. So that's a pretty good place to be on your core governmental operations. So, and then the other thing Jennifer did point out, the unrestricted net. She was talking about the cash, but I'll talk about it on a full accrual basis of the municipal authority. 2 years ago, at the end of June 30, 2016, municipal authority was sitting at a deficit of $3.7 million, and it's unrestricted. It was sitting at a deficit of $3.7 million, and at the end of last year, it was a positive 10.9, and at the end of this year, it's a positive 14.9 million. So that's the biggest turnaround that we've seen over the last couple of years. So anyway, and then we've talked about it. We talked about it a lot last year about the new accounting standard on the other post-employment benefits, and one of the things on the separate letter that we included to the governing to you all was kind of a definition of the implicit rate subsidy and why that really means, why that does represent in a full accrual accounting, why that represents a liability. Because I know, you think, well, you all aren't paying for the health insurance of your retirees, they're paying for their own, but because they're participating in the plan, that raises the cost to everybody and to the city. And so therefore the city, the city has to, under the accounting rules, the city has to recognize that, and it's that implicit rate subsidy is what drives that. So anyway, in addition to, I want to talk briefly about government auditing standards in the single audit. So the audit is performed in addition to just generally accepted auditing standards issued by the American Institute of CPAs. It's performed in accordance with government auditing standards issued by the Comptroller General of the United States. And so therefore, we do perform and report on our results of tests of internal controls over financial reporting and on non-compliance. And we did not have any internal control matters that we were required to report as it relates to the financial statements. The only non-compliance matter that we had, and it was not as significant as it was last year, but it was a carry forward, so we decided to go ahead and report it. Last year, there was a significant issue with some uncollateralized bank deposits. The city implemented some new procedures to correct that, but then a new account was opened, and when those new procedures didn't get carried over to at a new bank, didn't get carried over to that new bank, and so there was a period of time during the year where there were some uncollateralized deposits, and so that was one of those kind of a judgment call. I think, okay, well, we corrected it, but we only partially corrected it, and so we wanted to make sure, and Erin has already responded. The corrective action plan was, once that was brought to her attention, she implemented the corrective action plan then. So anyway, also.
That's listed on page 98.
Yeah, one of the very last.
I think that was $89,000 that was uncollateralized.
Yeah, this year. Last year it was a significant amount, but it was the same. It was the same error. It was just a smaller dollar amount.
Will you audit that again next year?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that is a state law, and one of our audits under government auditing standards is to audit the compliance with state laws and statutes that municipalities are required to follow.
Were we exposed during that time?
What?
Were we exposed during that time?
For about that $89,000, and it was corrected over a period of time within a short period of time. So our point or our thought was that the controls and procedures weren't in place to prevent that from occurring again. Once the new account at the new bank financial institution was open. So anyway, there was no loss, and now the controls and procedures have been corrected.
We believe it'll be fully corrected next year. We
Yes.
can come back and look at it again.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
whichever way it is, you'll report again next year.
Right.
On what the status is.
It'll be reported next year if it's fully corrected. Then we won't have a finding. The city, one of the things that's required is the city's always is required to respond to not only the current year findings, but the status of previous year findings, and those remain in the audit until they're fully corrected. And I have seen in my experience, usually not with the municipality, where I've seen it, I'll tell you, is that like some of the larger universities that our firm has done audits for in the past, is there might be a finding and it involves so many so many departments to correct, that it might take them 2 or 3 years to get that finding fully corrected. But the auditing standards require that it be reported each year as the status of what they're doing on that. So, but our audit is also, we do audit one of the city's major federal programs. Each year we look at, we get the schedule of expenditures of federal awards from management, and this year you had $1.95 million of federal expenditures. You're required to have an audit if those expenditures exceed $750,000. And then under the auditing guidelines of, it's called the Uniform Guidance issued by the Office of Management and Budget, we do risk assessments of the larger federal programs, and then we'll select one to make sure that or select one or more than one to make sure we get the required amount of coverage. See, this year we selected your disaster grants program, which was, what were the expenditures on that? $867,000 of expenditures. So it was roughly, the requirement is, since you all are a low risk auditee, or will be, actually I think this year you were still a high risk this year you were not a low-risk auditee. You will be a low-risk auditee next year. So, but this year we're required to audit 40% of your expenditures. So we got that with that one grant. Next year, because you will be a low-risk auditee, that audit coverage drops down to 20%. So anyway, that's all I have to talk about, but I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have. Yes,
Is
sir.
there a percentage over what we have in cash, over and above what that cash balance is
I'm sorry,
on the pledging?
Oh, the pledging is 110%, I believe, is the requirement. I'd have to look that up, but I believe it's the collateral. Isn't that right, Gerald? Or
Otherwise, you're gonna be
I'd have to look
bouncing
it up,
around
too.
all the time.
yeah, I believe, I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I believe the requirement is that the value of the securities or whatever that you pledge as collateral is 110% of the balance.
I think you're right.
Yeah, so.
I just did want to congratulate you on completing the audit this time before the end of the year. This is, I think, the first time since I've been on the commission this time that we've actually completed the audit by the end of the year.
We did it last year too.
We didn't see it until sometime in January. It was after, anyway, it doesn't make any difference.
Okay.
You
You're
go
welcome.
there. I do have one other question, if I may.
Yes, sir.
And that relates to, you were talking about the fraud investigation part of it. A pretty good sized city here in Oklahoma a couple years ago had a city employee that embezzled for several years significant amounts of money. And how is it that the audit didn't pick that up?
Wasn't your firm.
It wasn't my firm.
I'm not implying it was,
Yeah.
but when I read the article, the paper, it had been going on for quite some time, and it was up in hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I couldn't figure out why the audit would not pick that up, and I'm sure they were required to have an audit just like we are.
Yeah, and, it depends on, it depends, I mean, I guess on how the audit procedures are designed, and the nature of the fraud. I mean, a lot of times if there's collusion, more than one person, that can help disguise a fraud. I mean, I'll just say if the documentation is altered, that could help disguise it. If there's an inadequate assessment of the internal controls, that could help disguise it. That's the hard part about a fraud is, you said hundreds of thousands that went on for several years, and a lot of times what you'll see, and this is where it's hard from an auditor perspective, is, if someone were, I'm just going to say it, frankly, taking $50,000, or I'll even use a smaller amount, $30,000 a year from the city every year, I don't know that our audit procedures would be designed to catch that. But then 10 years from now, no, I'm just saying 10 years from now, it's discovered and you trace it back, and all of a sudden you realize, well, gosh, there's $300,000 out the door. How did you not catch that? At some point, it depends on the nature of how it's being hidden.
But anyway, this audit is supposed to detect those kinds of
It is.
situations.
It is.
Okay.
So,
Well, that makes me feel better.
yeah.
I think I can tell you that city after the meeting, because I could be wrong.
Well, if it's the one I'm thinking of, it's a pretty famous situation.
Got quite a bit of
Yeah.
press, I know.
Yeah. So, all right. Any other questions? Okay.
You must have done a good job, Mike.
Oh, I'm not gonna. Well, I will say this is a really good audit, and when you say that, we're glad we got done, I'm gonna give, our team worked hard, but it, 90% of the time, the audit's not gonna get done on time if the city the finance staff isn't as committed to getting, and ready and prepared, and when it's important to everybody involved, that's when it becomes, possible, because, we plan it and schedule it, and then when everybody meets the targets and the milestones, it gets done. So, yeah.
I'll tell you, it helps to have continuity in the audit team. as well from
Yeah.
our perspective at the city. And we've had that now for 6 years with RSM.
Yeah.
Helps
And
the
a particular-
collusion too.
And a particular team. Yeah, you're right. But again, I thought he was gonna tell you he did tell you early on, it's only reasonable assurance. It's not absolute assurance.
But that
We
reasonable is a
couldn't- we
high,
couldn't
it's,
afford for absolute assurance, right, Mike?
do what?
You would charge us more for absolute assurance. If you would even do
You
it.
all couldn't, I mean, there's not enough, I don't even know that you paid, paid, I couldn't give you a number to say absolute assurance because I could not give that, so, anyway.
Great.
It's a high level of assurance, that's what a reasonable, a reasonable assurance is a high level of assurance,
Our
so.
intent is to bring this back on the 15th for you to accept. If you have any questions in between then, feel free to ask myself or Aaron or the auditor directly. And if there's anything, if we need to talk about it again, we certainly will. Right now, I'm not planning on having Mike back unless you want him to come back on the 15th.
And I am at your, your, whatever you decide, I'm fine with, so. Just order up a better night.
Way better.
No, thanks.
Several fine hotels in town here.
Yeah.
And if I had planned for that, I would probably be staying one tonight, but
You might want to do that tonight.
no, I'm not planning for it. My wife is expecting me.
Thank you.
Thank you all, appreciate it.
Item 4, discuss proposed sign ordinance changes. Carol, is that you?
Oh, it's probably
Yeah, let me kick it off,
Gerald and-
Mayor. We're talking about the sign ordinance. We talked about this at a study session probably several months ago, talked about several things that you would like to see. The sign ordinance is pretty complicated. It's about 35 pages long or so. You had a chance to see a marked up version. We're trying to just look at some basic changes that we believe you have asked us to bring back to you. We want to make sure we're right about that. And then if there's other things you want to discuss, we can. That's the intent here. And then, yes, Carol and Angela will help us through it. Carol's actually been the one that's gone through the 35 pages.
Yeah,
But
and this
we-
isn't the whole ordinance, by the way.
Right. But we summarized, Carol summarized it with a few slides here for us.
Well, yes.
So you want to,
No, I'm not, I said I would do these, but that I'm not getting up there and
oh,
pumping them.
well then,
Yeah.
yeah, if you'll.
Yeah, I deal in complete sentences, but I assisted.
Okay, well, I'll do it then, best I can.
Fantastic.
You're on your own, I think.
All right, let's see what we did here.
New billboards, yeah, we
Right.
talked about
We
billboards.
want to allow existing billboards to be upgraded to the new digital technology we see over by where the new Jiffy Trip will be.
This is
So-
something we've talked about. I think some of you like it, some of you don't. We're just talking, we're trying to figure out what you want us to bring you back. You've seen the actual, since you have approved the billboard at Garland and Garrett, you've actually seen it now. So you probably have formed either the same opinion or a different opinion, but it's up to you what you want to do on this. I think it certainly is the way of the future.
It doesn't proliferate them,
Right.
but it does allow for upgrade of existing ones to digital.
Yes.
Is this basically the same standard that we allowed for the Jiffy Trip sign?
Yes.
That's fair.
Yes. And then Carol just went through and cleaned up some of our definitions and also removed a few that she did not believe we needed to have in our ordinance. Commissioner
Balloon?
Jansen,
Yes.
that's for you.
Is this your baby?
Yeah.
It's your baby, it's your present.
Balloon sign, you should say big blue monkeys.
Right, yes.
We didn't want to discriminate, we want to allow.
I understand. We can back up a minute to that one you just had on there.
Sure.
The institutional, yeah.
Yeah. What is that?
I'm trying to figure out now exactly what we changed there. What,
Okay, we didn't change, we're just taking it out.
Yes.
Because we've got it covered on, one of the things that all of our definitions did is they made this big distinction between governmental, institutional, nonprofit, profit. And so
you're just saying a sign's a sign.
we're trying to simplify. And for example, the bulletin board sign, you know, we said a bulletin board sign was a sign by a government, a religious, educational, or non-commercial institution, and by just saying a bulletin board sign is a bulletin board sign. I'm not even sure that I necessarily know what a bulletin board sign is, but what we tried to do is make them a little more, the business that has the sign, is it really important to have this would be kind of non-profit, non-commercial. And what we're hoping is that we don't have to have a definition of non-profit, non-commercial sign versus business sign.
What would be the difference? I mean, how would they be treated differently by the ordinance?
That's quitting bonus.
Okay, they shouldn't be,
Oh, okay.
is the idea. I mean, this is just here's the thing. We've got all these different kinds of signs. Changeable copy, bulletin board, electronic messaging, freestanding, glaring, and glaring signs. And this is like any sign that a club, association, a school, any non-profit would have. And in reading through the ordinance, I did not find that it was mentioned in the ordinance that's like 50 pages. So that's why I thought, well, let's remove it. We've got so many, I mean, if we don't ever say institutional signs have these special rules,
So we're taking that section out.
th-
Gotcha.
and aren't you happy?
Just the definition.
Yeah, just the definition, because we never used it in the 50 pages.
Great.
And then a few we just
Okay.
kind of made little changes to.
Cleaning up and
Yeah.
general
Right.
things like that.
Right.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
The balloon signs we're proposing to handle as temporary signs,
Yes.
Makes sense.
One would hope.
meaning that they wouldn't
Yeah.
be permanent.
right.
But they
But
would be able to
before,
have them for what's the, has it?
30
4 times a year
days,
for
4
30 days?
times a year. 1 per quarter, 30 days, or if they want to group them together, we also allow that. We're flexible, just
Sounds
as long
adequate.
as they
so
don't
the
exceed.
balloon used to be one of those prohibited ones, and now it is a temporary sign.
Yeah, okay.
What about the little sign trucks that we see running around town that are electronic billboards? They're like box vans and you see them moving. Has anyone
Oh, I
seen
have not
those?
seen those.
Really?
I haven't seen them here. I've
Oh,
seen
yeah.
them in the city a lot.
There's 2 of them in Enid now.
Those are
One parked the other
prohibited.
Last week, they're in front of TJ Maxx.
Yeah, there's 2 of them and they're
Okay.
billboards and the billboard goes all the way around the box van.
Oh.
Oh, those are prohibited
electronic.
in our ordinance. You can have vehicle signage to identify your business on the side of your vehicle, but not electronic.
Yeah, it's real bright,
Okay,
real noticeable.
if you see them again, holler at us.
So it sounds like we want to leave them.
We'll run right out.
Find them.
I don't think we
Didn't
want
say
to
Vans.
allow that or encourage it.
All right.
They're horrible and down in the city at night, just because they're all trying to drive as slow as possible and slow down traffic. It's just
Yeah.
most obnoxious thing.
Here we go. That's what we allow, for vehicle signage.
Okay.
Well, should we address?
We may need to address that
That's
it's,
the definition.
right.
Is it, if you go on a little further, I think it gets into what's prohibited maybe, or
Yeah.
pull up the ordinance.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
there's,
don't believe,
because that's kind of new technology, so if we're
I-
upgrading it, we ought to.
I would agree. I think we need to address that.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was more clearly stated in the ordinance, but it isn't.
well, that's only the definition.
It
There's-
could fall under the electronic messaging centers that we'll discuss in a moment, but it doesn't
not
really
approving this
because it's
tonight.
something
No.
different.
No.
You want to just figure that part out?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll
when we
look
come
at
back?
that.
Yeah.
I didn't even know they existed, so.
What we're talking about are basically moving billboards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, on vehicles, and we've seen them other places, but
Yeah.
I didn't know they had arrived here in Enid.
There's 2 of them.
All right.
Okay.
Live on fire.
Okay.
You might-
Right now, our electronic signage has been falling under changeable copy, and there was just a section that defined how bright it could be and how long it had to be static. And so we've created a new section that's called Electronic Message Center, which is the standard language from the sign industry. And then also brought in a foot candle measurement of light, because if we ever do have a problem with a sign and we need to go out and measure it, we can buy a tool to use to measure foot candle for $100 versus measuring nits, it's $1,000. So usually people have just complied when we've said your sign is too bright and it flashes too much, they've adjusted. But if we ever do have a problem and need to purchase,
We still prohibit actual animation though, is that
Yes.
correct?
yes.
I think Bank Central is running animations on theirs, just west of downtown.
Okay, I thought we addressed that with, we addressed something with Bank
We
Central.
did, what happens is people change for a while and then
I noticed that
They
a
go
couple days
back
ago,
and-
that it was a rolling animation.
We'll take a look at it and see if it has issues.
This particular situation has happened a couple of times where people have been installing a very small wooden sign, and our ordinance actually says you have to be a sign contractor, and it seems very, yes. So we asked that be changed because that's something that staff has,
The
Had an
25
issue
square
with.
feet smaller than a sheet of plywood.
right.
Yeah.
And Carol's done some clarification on our prohibited signs.
Yeah, we took out balloon signs as prohibited.
I think we should, I'd like to see that one come back with the size of a sheet of plywood, 32 feet.
On the, okay,
Yes,
on the
just because
extension?
a lot of people make their own signs out of a sheet of plywood.
Okay,
Okay.
No reason to make them use a half sheet or whatever.
right.
32 feet's not that big a difference.
Most of ours have been smaller, which is why I think we landed at that 25, but certainly that's reasonable.
Okay.
Whatever you wish.
That seems like a reasonable
What is a pallet sign, just out of curiosity?
1 foot by 8 foot.
4x8, yeah.
Some of those where you see people just grab
Go the other way.
pallets and stack them and slap signage on there.
Off-premise signs.
Yes.
I've got a business up on the north end of town that had a sign up for a long period of time, and they've
Right.
had to move locations, and they're not on the main thoroughfare, and so they really don't have any way to be able to advertise to get their folks to be able to make their turn right off of 4th Street. Business has been there for 20-something years, or actually longer than that, but I'm trying to get the rationale as to why off-premise signs would be a big deal, a big issue. Particularly when it's permitted by the landowner that they're gonna put the sign on that doesn't have an issue with it.
Well, and that would be up for you all to discuss whether you want them or not. I will say, from my years of studying in code, one of the things to be concerned about is if you want to avoid sign clutter, is allowing an off-premise signage, because what can happen is anybody that owns a vacant lot, and we've had a lot of calls about this, you know, they'll want to let their friend who has a business put a sign up on their vacant lot. Well, then the next thing you know, they think, okay, they're allowed. So then I can lease another spot to another, business that wants to advertise their business, and then suddenly all of our vacant lots have signage that's not related to that particular property. That would be the reason not to do it. And if you want to allow it, then, you would have to consider the benefits. That particular situation, I really do think they should apply for a variance and just see what happens. I will say, our sign ordinance used to be very problematic, and we fixed it, what are you wanting, like 2 years ago or so, Commissioner Wilson? I know she was really involved in that. It seems like.
Never really fixed it, but
Well, it seems like we have address the community needs, because we have not had a variance since we went to this revision. And we were having a variance to our sign ordinance all the time. So no ordinance is perfect.
Sure.
And there will always be some ordinance that doesn't make somebody happy or something they don't like about it, but overall, this seems to meet the needs. Sign ordinances are complex. Every communities that I've looked at, they're all complex because signs can be a big problem but you need it for your businesses.
Yeah.
So trying to find that balance.
I think my confusion on it is that if we have billboards now that are electronic that advertise for multiple businesses as it is now, what the distinction would be between that and that one outside of having multiple signs on a property, and then applying for a variance. It's very cost prohibitive for small
That's
businesses.
true.
You're talking about hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars, depending on what it is that you're looking at. So.
Sometimes when people come in, we're like, oh.
I think
You know.
I can work with you probably on that particular situation you're talking about, but whether or not you want to change the prohibition would be something we want to talk about here. Our difficulty,
I don't want
we
more,
could do
I don't
that,
want more off-premise
but
signs. I don't, sign
what that
clutter.
would do is open up any business to put a off-premise sign anywhere they could lease property or buy property.
Sure.
And if
Yeah.
we want to do that, certainly you guys can do that. We just need to think about potential consequences and make sure that we're comfortable with, and maybe nobody would do that, but I know we've
I think
had a
avoiding
few
clutter has
requests.
value. And that we may just have to deal with the variance.
But I think we can,
Yeah.
I think we can visit about, there may be a way to solve that one without changing the ordinance and potentially.
Sounds good.
And maybe the remedy is make the variance not so expensive.
Well, I think it has a lot to do with the survey and and having notifying everybody in the community about whether or not they, the sign's literally moving, less than 100 yards from where it's been located
that's a bunch of
for years
nonsense.
now. And so now they have to.
So I mean, maybe make that easier.
Our fee's only about $100 or something.
It's $100 on our fee,
The
but
big fee on that and the expense and the
Abstract.
time is going to the abstract company and paying whatever they have to pay to get the 300-foot list. That typically can cost several $100, $400 or $500.
They have to go through all that just to move it, to put a sign somewhere?
The
If
variance.
you're going to do a
So-
variance.
It's a
Variance
variance.
request
Yeah.
to the Board of Adjustment, yes.
We could
We could change
ponder
the-
special exception. We could craft a special exception, which is less onerous.
Or they could just do what the skating rink does and just go stick them over there on garage whenever they want to anyway.
I know.
Until a commissioner reports it publicly, and we'll go out and enforce the ordinance.
All depends on whose ox is being gored.
And
Good
I
point,
just,
Mayor.
I
Good
would
point.
just mention one thing. We've spent a lot of money on our directional signs,
Mhm.
which are, by their very nature, off-premise.
Yeah, but they're classy, well done, well thought out, consistent.
Yes, yes,
Minimal.
yes, but they are
Invasive,
yes,
iteration
but
of
they
that.
are a proliferation of
But
off-premise
they're the
signage.
least invasive version of that.
Just,
Also, there is no off-premise. The entire city is the city. We can't be off-premise by definition. Come on, Carol.
I think by the definition,
Yeah.
by
Yeah,
the
no, I-
definition of the
You're welcome.
ordinance, it would be off-premise. But
Yeah.
I'm just pointing out what, like, the citizens might say.
Could appear to be inconsistent.
Good point,
I
Carol.
don't think that's inconsistent at all.
Okay, very good.
No.
I didn't think you would,
No.
but I thought I would
Good
say.
effort.
I don't think we should make people go through a whole survey and abstract process.
survey.
Or whatever.
It's not an abstract either. It's just
Nonsense they
just a
have to do
300-foot list.
do
All
that.
it
That's
is
silly.
a list of everybody within 300 feet. It's just no survey. There's no abstract.
That's silly.
But it's the abstractor who puts the list together, and sometimes
Is
they're
that-
slow.
Is that the state law for variances, Carol?
And
Yeah.
a lot of-
Yeah, I mean,
a
there's
lot of
nothing we can do about that.
That's
Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah.
these people probably don't even live in the city of
It
Enid.
seems like such a
They
big
don't?
hassle.
Well, but I mean, the property ownership property ownership right doesn't rely on residency. It's property ownership right.
Yeah, REM,
Yeah.
not in persona.
Seems like a hassle.
Anything else anybody wants to add, take out?
Well, we have some
There's a few more slides,
ideas.
I think, or is that it?
Oh, I thought we were done.
Oh.
Sorry. We're removing, the PUD standards that were different. So
Yeah.
in a PUD, they just get to do what everybody else gets to do if they want to do that.
What does PUD mean?
Planned
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 unit
unit
development.
development.
We had planned unit development sign stuff in the sign ordinance, and then we had sign stuff in the planned unit development portion. So we consolidated. So planned unit development, you just look to sign things in that section rather than the duplication.
Must be something we copied from another municipality.
It was many years ago. I think in 2010, 2012, that version came along. And then we've modified it.
They used to call that pirating.
And you've already covered
I
the
did
last
cover
part
that.
already.
And that was it. So, anything else though?
Now, these were some changes that we thought we could get done and bring to you. A more thorough review of a 50-page ordinance would certainly take more, but if you have some more ideas on some things that think need to be changed, let Carol or I know, and we'll work on it.
We definitely have a few more that they've identified already.
Thank you.
Colonel, I bet you're glad you don't have signs in the sky.
Yeah.
We've got the electric.
Skywriting prohibited.
I'm not sure my billboard is, when you come to my front gates, authorized and needed.
Oh,
You were thinking about those 4 signs, weren't you?
I think yours have a special exception, I believe.
Anything else? We're adjourned. We'll meet upstairs at 6:30.
Thank you for watching the Enid City Commission study session. All meetings are broadcast on local cable channel 12 and in high definition on channel 112. In addition, the study session is live streamed on the web at enidtv.org. If you have any questions or comments regarding this broadcast, please visit the City of Enid website at enid.org.